Well, welcome everybody. I guess for the purposes, we'll just do introductions, just so everybody knows.
Autumn Baker, I'm just here to take minutes.
Dave Gates, Fire Chief Pocatello.
Scott Lockhart, Local 187.
Shane Groh, Local 187.
Eric Anderson, same local.
Same local. You're not a different one?
Nope, same local.
Andy Moldenhauer, Local 187.
All right. And we're here to start the conversation about how to implement 4896. So I did craft a short agenda just to start. I kind of feel like some of our major goals are to ensure a safe working environment for the members as well as the public. Obviously, our end state will be to develop a policy document that clearly outlines the protocols for safe implementation and operation. I probably should have put operation, but how we're going to continue. I think it's really important that we both understand both parties' expectations, that we're I think above board in terms of what we expect out of the program. And then obviously I think we probably should at some point set what we want to be our target start date of what we would like to be shooting for.
Well, I mean, looking at these four right here, they all seem very reasonable to me.
So, is there anything we should add to those as goals or?
Not that I can see right now.
Okay.
Until discussion comes out, we might find something else, but
all right.
I think it looks good to me.
Some of the things that I was considering that should be included in the document would be some metrics, like what kind of things we're going to measure, to measure the impact of the system on various aspects of our job. We probably need to figure out the schedule in terms of how are we going to migrate from the current schedule to the next schedule. What are we going to do? What's the process for moving? How do we minimize the impact to the city in terms of having to pay FLSA overtime and things like that? And also maintain the law, because we have to follow the law. So what kind of FLSA cycle? I know that's one of particular interest to Christy. I think she is in desire to have a single FLSA date, one date for all platoons. And if you'll recall, I think we went to 3 dates back in the day when it was going to impact, when they were talking about taking away your FLSA for vacation and things like that. And so they have modified that and it no longer exists. So I think we're shooting for a single date. What kind of policies need to be changed? Like what do we currently have that's written down that probably needs to be adjusted or modified that would need to be changed to accommodate the 4896? I think we should probably outline what we expect the shift expectation to be, what would happen on shifts, what job assignments are viable, not viable, what kind of that, it's a big topic. It's not something that I think we're going to solve right away, but kind of the concepts of, well, what about prevention? What about scheduled training? What happens when the day you have a scheduled training and you get hammered the day before? So what do we do? Obviously there's probably some things that there's differences. If it's an in-house instructor, that's a little more flexible, but if we've also called in somebody and paid somebody to come in, say for hazmat training or something like that, how do we accommodate that? Communications, this one that I've heard a lot about is that, with the 4896, there can be a pretty extended period of time between staff communications or the ability to communicate. Get it that email is a mechanism to kind of using, what's the terminology for TV shifting your time. You get to watch when you want instead of when it was the old days. I'm dating myself. You had to watch it when it was on. It was on at 5 o'clock. If you weren't in front of the TV at 5 o'clock, that's when you watched it. Well, today that doesn't happen anymore. We can watch whatever show we want whenever we want. But I've heard that that's kind of been problematic, and I'd like to see us identify how to do that. How to objectively identify fatigue. Oh, and I would go back to communications just because that's always one of our number one, we're always saying communications suck or communications are difficult, and my personal opinion is communications are always the holy grail. We want to communicate as maximum as possible, but again, it's the receiver and the sender all have biases and blocks, and so that makes it complicated. How to objectively identify fatigue, and then what do we do when an individual unit, station, or platoon experience fatigue? What's our solution? And then the one that I have here, and that's just is, what do we craft in here that's kind of the unforeseen? Because we know that there's going to be some things that come out of, anytime you make a major change like this, there's going to be something that pops up and we go, well, I didn't expect that. That wasn't something. How do we cope with that? And I think we need some kind of a mechanism built in that says, well, hey, this is how when one of those things happens. Whether it's the committee meets and the committee sits down and says, okay, well, here's the problem. How do we solve this? And we hammer that out, or whatever. Because I think some of these things are going to happen. So that's kind of what I've got. I do have dates. There's just items on here. That's kind of my talking points. Next week, I've got the 26th in the afternoon, 28th anytime, and the 29th after 9 a.m. So just kind of round that out. So
See if we need them.
you are optimistic. But I am one guy. I know I got to kind of say, you guys could blanket part of me and then get whatever you want. So how would you guys like to proceed?
We can start with A and walk through it, or if you guys think there's a more logical
Sure.
order or place
Not
to start.
not being in the negotiating meeting, I guess the first question I would ask is, what was the directive from the contract language?
Yeah, that is good.
That we,
Probably a good place to start.
the tentative agreement from the city and the union said
So
that we should do what?
I guess at this point, we have agreed that we are going to move to the schedule, either with some documents agreed to here, and we'll get to it in FY22, or we'll move to it in FY23 for sure, on a trial basis. But for right now, we're hoping to move to it on a non-trial basis, at full implementation. That's my understanding of it. Are we kind of on the same page there?
Pretty much.
Okay.
And
I don't, you probably have the TA language more than I do. I don't actually have the TA language.
yeah.
so-
That was.
Can I share that?
Yeah, please, absolutely.
So that's my understanding of it. That right now we are trying to figure out how to make it happen, not on a trial basis, but a permanent implementation.
Right.
So I guess a few things about that. We've been talking about an implementation manual for a trial in the past, at least in labor management.
Right.
And some just 49.6 meetings. And if we're not going for a trial per se, I think that simplifies it a lot, because now we don't have to define the trial. We
Right.
can just define
Right.
the move.
Agreed.
And what we'll do. So some of those complications that we had been dealing with, I think we can not worry about now. which is
Sure.
nice.
And that's kind of, so from my perspective, like even the metrics, I think metrics are always a good thing. You kind of want to know the impact of something.
Certainly.
We monitor most of these things, but I wouldn't get lost in the details, because my opinion is I'm not creating these metrics with oh gosh, if this happens,
Yeah,
we're
there's
going to
no-
unwind this clock. But I think that clearly, at any point in time, you guys may want to unwind it. You may find this schedule untenable. The city may say, you know what, this just doesn't work for us, and I'm not going to try and predict what reason they would, I'm not going to be here. I'm not going to try and predict what reason they would want to do that. And I think having those, whether we outline the metrics or not is kind of irrelevant, because I think they're already there. I mean, anybody can collect the data. I mean, it's just a matter of collecting the data.
Yeah, it seems like it'd be responsible to track some of
Sure.
those things, just to know.
Sure.
But yeah, like you said, we're not going to have a trigger point of,
Right.
if this happens, then we have to do
Unwind.
these things.
Right. You
Which
cross the
simplifies it.
bridge when you get there and decide, well, hey, seems odd. What are we going to do about it? So.
Okay.
So maybe we should start with goal D and just ask you the question, because you guys are representing your union. If we could have ideal target date, what is that for you guys?
Implementation date?
Yeah. I mean, because it helps us to know if we're shooting for October 1 of 21, then that's we have a pretty aggressive schedule to hit. Whether we can hit that or not, I don't know, but that's why I just want to know. Ryan had told me that you had some disconcert between your own members, that some wanted it October 1 and some wanted it after vacation bidding schedule. So I leave that to you. I mean, what's your target?
There's certainly been some discussion amongst members about when to do it. But I think that, I guess please stop me if I'm wrong here, but I think that if we could come to an agreement and get whatever language we need finalized in the contract to be ratified without having to do MOUs, that would be ideal. So an implementation on or around October 1 would be.
So I don't know, I don't know how you're going to do that, just because I'm not positive how, when the city council is going to ratify theirs compared to yours. I don't remember the conversation about what they said, the earliest.
When were they planning?
Because I want to say September.
Yeah, the city council was looking at possibly ratifying on August 19th. And we don't have a red line copy, so we can't take it before the body this month, which means that the earliest we'll take it forward will probably be the 18th, I think will be our union meeting. So,
August 18th?
yes, that would be the earliest we could take it forward. Provided we get the red line
I
copy.
mean, just in,
Get
so
the
what
chance to review.
I just talked to Heather a little while ago about this, and we had talked about, in effect, creating a blank article that was the 4896 article that would be, in a sense, when we ratified this document, that would, in a sense, become that article, if that makes sense. But it probably won't be, it's still going to be somewhat of an MOU. I mean, it's going to have to be something that's, I think it's going to have to be ratified, probably separate from the contract. I don't think we're going to get.
If we can't make it by the 19th,
Yeah.
then that's.
I mean, we can try. I mean, I'm not opposed to it. If we can get through this, then that's fine. If we can get to what that is, that's just a lot of work, and all of us have other jobs. Some of us more day job than others. And I'm sorry, but I'm not working nights and weekends for this project. So, I mean, so do you want to target October 1st as your
My
date?
my target date was October 3rd. That would line us up with both Idaho Falls and Blackfoot, so the other two departments in our region that are doing the 4896. That I believe is the end of an FLSA period, and then over the course of the next 18 days, that would encompass all three platoons in the new FLSA period. So that was the soonest that we could implement it and
Be aligned to
and be
everybody.
aligned and fit all three platoons in the one new FLSA period. That would be October 3rd and 4th would be C platoons, first two shifts.
So I guess going back to you guys, do you think you'll have support from your membership to go to that? Just because
I think so.
I think so. Yeah, one of the big issues was vacation. Like you said, around Christmas, people didn't want their Christmas
Right.
that they bid off. And I think we've come up with a way to kind of cover that so that whatever you bid, you'll basically get on the 4896. And I can show you what we've come up with. It's just a concept, but I think that's alleviated a lot of people's
Well,
worry.
I would tell you the vacation is your business.
Yeah, well,
As long as I'm not paying for more time
Yeah,
off.
yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Then I don't care how you guys sort that out.
Well, and I just brought that up because I think that was the big concern, and I think we've got an idea that
And
most
that's
people are pretty
certainly
happy with.
something we'll have to work through. And like Eric said, we have a plan for it. And a lot of it will just be pretty much mapping the current vacation to the new schedule as closely as possible. And I think what Eric's found, at least on C platoon, I don't know if we've looked at the other two platoons yet, but
So just out of
on C,
curiosity,
it maps pretty well.
just out of curiosity, doesn't matter to me personally, but one of the things that I heard is sometimes there are some of the 4896 shifts that sometimes you work both Christmas and Christmas Eve. Is that going to happen this Christmas and Christmas Eve for anybody?
I believe it would.
Yeah.
And
Have you guys
in
thought of
those
how you want to cope with that?
Yes, yeah, in that situation, in the policy that we have kind of drafted, the platoon that works the 22nd and 23rd would take one of their days and work the 24th. So you would essentially work the 22nd, 24th, and the 23rd and 25th. And you would still,
So you're going to work,
no, you would
96
have.
how many hours in a row?
So B platoon would work the 23rd and the 25th, and A platoon would work the 22nd and 24th. And so they would just swap their second day for the oncoming platoon's first day, so that at no at no time would any one platoon work both Christmas and Christmas Eve.
And being that we'd all be on one FLSA cycle, it all works out well. cleanly.
I do understand that, so.
And really, I just plagiarized that from Boise's policy. That's what they do as well, so that seemed to be pretty standard across the 4896 board.
So, right now, our target is October 3rd? Is that,
Okay?
I'm not opposed to that. Like I said, if we can get through what we want, I'm certainly not opposed to October 3rd as the date.
Yeah, I would say that this is, the third seems to be the closest to the first that we found that will be a smooth transition. But if we were to say, pass on this information to finance, and they looked at it and said, well, actually, we think the 6th would be, for just throwing out a date, would be a
Sure.
good day. I think, thereabouts of the first. is what we'd like to
Well, I like the idea of tying with the other departments. Not that we do a ton of interacting the way, like, say, the Treasure Valley does, but, you never know, and at some point it'd be nice to be aligned a little bit,
Yeah.
so. Let's see. So October 3rd will be our target for now. Rather than spend a bunch of time identifying metrics, why don't you guys come up with, I think your plan had some metrics, so I'll look over that. I'll throw some of mine in and I'll be ready to, have a list of metrics that we should consider. Unless you want to talk about them, and we can brainstorm some now. If you want, or to me, it's not where I don't want to spend my time.
Since we're not trying to define like the actions that we'll take if we reach certain levels with these metrics, we're just going to track them and kind of see what the effects are. At that point, I don't know that we need to put a ton of time into it. I think that the list that we gave you already, or that we kind of already worked on, is pretty good. It tracks the obvious stuff like overtime and sick leave and injuries, things like that that we'd be interested in for sure. Is a good place to start, but again, if we're not going to be necessarily using them to make decisions on whether we can continue or not with the trial, I don't know if we need to put a ton of effort into making that list.
Agreed.
And we can certainly revamp that list anytime as time goes on.
Well, and the fact is, data, it's always there. I mean, just a matter of whether we kind of agree, and like you said, it's not that we're agreeing on some metric, because I can always get a metric no matter what, and you can always go get a metric no matter what. I think it's just maybe even just identifying things that should be considered so that we're all aware of, what criteria make sense or what they could be impactful because of a shift change or a schedule change, and then, making that aware of so everybody knows.
Yeah, sure, bring it to the front of everybody's mind.
Right. So how do you guys see the change? We got to follow FLSA law. There's no doubt. So we're going to, what does this tell me?
That's the enclosed box, that's the new schedule, and the enclosed box is the new FLSA cycle.
Sorry. I turned the phone off, but I didn't turn this part on.
Maybe just sit back watching, but if you want to come up and join us if you're more interested in the FLSA cycle, maybe have some more insight. You're welcome to.
So Shane, forgive me, but I'm not, so I'm talking about the actual transition. So how do I read this for the actual transition?
That third would be the start of the new FLSA cycle, because not only are we changing to a new cycle, but we're going from 3 to 1. And so we're going from 3 9-day cycles to 1 18-day. Right,
So my concern is that by going from a 3 9-day cycles to an 18-day cycle, I think that's going to expose us to maximum overtime. I think if we were to shift to the 18-day cycle ahead of time and then plan out as we migrate over to the 4896, I think that would give us more flexibility to minimize overtime, if that makes sense. So go to an 18-day cycle at first to give us more bandwidth to move people around, if that makes sense. I don't know what that looks like. It just intuitively, it gives us a little more flexibility to try and create the changes in a bigger window and minimize the impact of overtime. And I'm just throwing that out as an option because I feel like, the city doesn't want to swallow a big, bone sideways. They would like to.
Yeah, neither do we.
I mean, I just know this. I mean, I've heard that there are some departments that go over and they say, look, there's going to be no overtime. The city's not willing to do that. They're not willing to just say, well.
To just agree to a no overtime?
To agree to a no overtime.
So Chief,
Yeah.
just in looking at it and looking how FLSA cycles fall, if we went to a new cycle on October 3rd, then C platoon would be fine because that's currently the beginning of their 9-day FLSA cycle. A platoon would be okay because it would potentially expose overtime on the 5th because A platoon would come on the 5th and 6th. And so the end of their 9-day FLSA cycle is the 5th. And then B platoon would be in the middle of their FLSA cycle. And so they would potentially be exposed to overtime on the 8th. But then we'd be up on the new cycle.
So what I would like to do is, would you be opposed to, if we can look at the numbers and say, if we shift to a longer FLSA period first and then move to minimize the impact of overtime, would you be okay with that? I'm going to turn to Christy for this because this isn't something she's the genius behind the FLSA cycle, not me. And just taking a look at it, I'm not. I could figure it out.
Could we move to that new FLSA cycle before the fiscal year?
I think if that was our plan, first of all, let's be clear. If we can get to the point where we're so close that October 3rd is a viable date, I don't see why we can't say, yes, we're going to shift it to the 18-day FLSA cycle, whatever, 18 days before October 3rd, and then move forward.
Can I ask a question from the audience? Are you committed to it being C, A, B as the order? Because if you go C, B, A, you, just with what I'm looking at right here, you reduce that overtime impact because you're not bringing A platoon back until after their FLSA cycle has ended. B platoon would have started their FLSA cycle, but even what you have to look at is within that FLSA cycle, do they work more than 3 shifts? They would work the 2nd, they could work the 5th and 6th. That's still looking at that cycle that they're in. That only works 3 shifts in that cycle. Although they're starting, you have to look at the, if you look at when you're closing and when you're starting and because you're overlapping them, you have to take the overtime that's greater of the 2.
So Christy, I think part of the reason, so I'm hearing several objectives out of this. Objective A is we would like to align with the other departments, so we need the same alignment so that when we're finally over the 4896, we want our A platoon to align with their A platoon, our B platoon to align with their B. Is that an accurate objective?
Yes.
So then the other objective is that we would like to be as close to October 3rd as possible, or I'll just say October 1st is possible. You gave the 3rd because that's when it aligns with theirs, and the same thing with that FLSA cycle. And so I'm just simply saying if we're allowed the ability to flex the FLSA period, and I don't even know if we can do this legally, right? I don't understand, but if we could agree to an earlier FLSA start date that expands to 18 days, then I would hope that we could work around to end up with being on track with the other departments, minimizing overtime, and being aligned with the same schedule and the same FLSA period.
So does it really matter if we're on the same FLSA cycle as other agencies, or do you just want to be on the same ABC schedule as them?
I think really just saying blocks for the most part,
Same
the
2
2-day
days.
blocks, because it doesn't matter if RA works on vital policy, just as long as if there was ever something where we were working together, we had the same day on and the same days off.
Right. Okay.
It doesn't really
Okay, so
matter.
you expressed it more as A, was it with A?
Yeah, and I think the intent really is Chubbuck is a good example. Let's say we go, right now we work the same schedule as Chubbuck. And so when our ambulances go out there, they're familiar with those EMTs, they're familiar with the firefighters.
Right.
They have a good working relationship with them. If we could keep that same idea.
And I agree, and I think I was going down the road of you. I really think it would be better to have the ABC aligned as well for also the same rationale that if we were to ever consolidate, that we're kind of still the same shift. And so we're not even asking you to change what platoon number you are. It doesn't really matter, no.
If the letter changed, but everybody still stayed on the same crew and
okay, so
same people.
you guys decide, because I don't care.
Yeah, that's, and we
I
can
can
work
see
that,
the
we can work that
benefit.
details out.
Yeah.
So you would be okay shifting, going to a longer FLSA cycle, well, not longer,
Earlier.
18-day ahead of time to give us the maximum window to slide everybody into an appropriate schedule
I think so, yeah.
to minimize overtime,
I think
with the end game of minimizing overtime.
If that's the way we can do it the smoothest, yeah,
Okay.
that makes sense.
Christie, is that something that you can work on? I'll work with you on it, but just sitting down and,
Is that doable within the current contract? Because the contract goes through September 30th. Can we adjust to an 18-day?
With an MOU?
It'd be the MOU, right, which we could
it would have to, yeah.
adjust the dates of the MOU.
This is one of those things that's kind of funny, right? I mean, we're in the process of developing a document that will, in effect, supplant anything else within the contract that relates to shift schedule. Basically, kind of my mindset is like, we're creating Article 32 or whatever. I don't know what article is available, but we're creating Article X that is going to basically be prefaced by saying this article has been agreed upon and supplants any other article in this contract as it relates to schedule, FLSA period, and that would become the controlling article. And at some point, 3 years from now, you guys can craft it all back into a singular document. But that's kind of so I don't know. I mean, could we do this based on the fact that we had reached agreement on this document, and this document became the controlling? I certainly wouldn't be the one who got in the weeds over that, but if we had to sign an MOU temporarily to then enact the MOU that we're going to enact, I don't know, go ahead. You make my head hurt thinking about that.
None of us are the lawyers, but it does seem reasonable that if we're going to have an MOU most likely anyway.
That's what I
We can
think.
include that as part of it, I would assume.
Right.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, either way, I think we're going to be in an MOU. I just don't see us getting this thing done by August 18, 19 and having something that,
And if we're pushed to a start date later on,
Right.
beyond October, then we definitely, it's just a part of the MOU.
we're just trying to, I'm fine with the target of early October. As early in October as possible. October 3rd is as good as any date, and if it fits that, then that's good.
Well, and I would say that we could just, Article 8 is our regular work week, which defines our schedule and defines the FLSA periods. I think we could just incorporate the work schedule and the FLSA periods in that, and then reference a document for implementation, and approve that as an MOU.
I think that's the high-level stuff. My opinion is we can get, once we reach agreement on how that's going to go, then I think that we'll sit down with the attorneys and figure out how they want it and how you guys want it, so. Okay, so just to deal with this, how to change to the 4896, we're shooting for October 3rd. We're willing to expand the FLSA period on the front end in order to minimize overtime with a hopeful outcome to align our, at least, maybe not our FLSA period, but at least our shift schedule with the surrounding departments. Is it reasonable?
Yeah. Sounds
Okay.
reasonable.
Is there anything else? Oh, and then we're going to have one FLSA start date. Once we're entered in this, it will be a singular FLSA start date for all platoons. I know that's one of the things that Christie wanted. Okay, I think we've got that ironed out. Who wants to work on just crafting up the language that, and we'll get the actual, once we figure out how that would work or what it would look like, but.
I have a rough draft. It's not,
Okay.
it's not with me, so I think it's
Close enough.
It's pretty close, yeah.
Okay,
That's it. Yeah.
do you have a copy that I can have? Is this one I can have?
That's our only copy. We have
Oh,
to-
well, let's not do that. Why- I don't want to take your only copy. Why?
We can make a
Can you
copy.
just email me a copy of that then?
Yeah,
What is that called? Your
this is just a draft on how to switch to the 4896.
Do you just want to put like we can add it as an attachment or something into the minutes after the fact, or after you email it in?
You-
And actually, is this the only copy of this as well? So can, Because we should
You can have
probably-
that one. I got a
we can
copy
have
of
this
that.
one?
Because I can scan them and just put them
Okay.
on the minutes as attachments.
Yeah, if you'd like, I could go make a copy of that.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, why not?
Okay.
And there's even some, after I printed it and worked on it, we
Yes,
still
it's
went through and went
awesome. Yeah.
and penned it again. So like I said, it's a working copy. It's not anything that we're rigidly adhered to.
Draft and rolled, it's okay.
So let's, I don't know, which one would you rather talk about? Policy changes or shift expectations?
Policy changes, I think, let's start there.
Start there? Okay. What policies do you see us needing to modify or change?
I guess in my view, there's not a ton that are schedule specific that we have right now. A lot of them don't reference our schedule at all. So the ones that stand out would be vacation bidding, obviously, we'd have to adjust. Going from go-rounds to whatever you want to call them, tours or sets or, your 2-day blocks. Possibly, we'd want to look at our trade policy, but I think our trade policy is still applicable as it stands. And there's one more.
There's not a lot that directly reference our schedule, so I think in that regard,
So what-
it's fairly easy.
What was that?
So I'd like to think about this, not only what are referenced by schedule, but also kind of which ones could be impacted. Like what things could happen because of this 4896. And I've got a few, and they're not going to be as easy. So, because vacation, from my perspective, that falls back on you guys, whatever you design your vacation schedule. We said how many days are available, and you guys decide how you want to allocate them. I don't care how you do that. I will tell you the trade policy I have concern with is really, and I talked to Shane about this the other day. I kind of liken it to this. You work, one guy in shift, maybe two guys on shift are working an extra long tour, whatever you want to call it, right? Maybe they're working 72 hours, maybe they're working 48 hours. But that's a small percentage of the total, right? We're flipping this around, and now there's going to be a large, which from my perspective, so he's the one guy that's a little tired, but we're all his teammates, and we can kind of carry him through maybe his fatigue. When you flip that around and you have a lot of people that have the potential to be exposed to that same level of fatigue, it's different. You don't have that same level. And I feel like my personal opinion is 72 hours trade should just not be available. I feel like that's just too long. I think 48 hours in a row. I've worked 48 hours in a row and it sucks. I don't know how you guys are gonna do this, but that's just me. I have literally been awake for not even 48 hours. I used to shift work out at the site, and I would fall asleep standing up. It sucked. And you feel rummy. You feel absolutely rummy. That's my fear. I fear that there's going to be more than, the occasional person who's a little fatigued. And so I'm fearful of having a trip policy where, you know, you don't have that backstop of 25 guys helping you through a rough shift when all 25 guys could be on a rough shift. And I don't know what that looks like, because obviously, if you're trying to do a trade, I know where you guys would want to be. You want to align your trades to your schedule because that's least impactful to your days off. But the reciprocal is, that's a tough one.
So the policy now is a 72 needs permission or sign off or something, right?
48 is the maximum currently that you can work. 72 being an
Without
exception.
permission.
Yeah, so I guess my idea, and I'm just thinking out loud here, is, you know, what if we pass down to the BCs or whoever's doing the signing off is, we need to look closer and maybe not approve trades for 72 if someone's going to be on the ambulance the whole time, and maybe be a little bit more strict about it. But if you're going to be
Well,
at
I
Station
think-
5, 72.
So my concern is, maybe then that a 72-hour trade has to be approved by the chief or his designee. I'm not comfortable with the battalion chief. He's too
Okay.
close, he's your friends, he doesn't, you know, I'm just not comfortable with that because I feel like there's just too much, we're friends, we're all teammates, and I feel like that should be at a higher level.
Is that something you want to do?
I don't want to do it, but my designee will. I won't be here. So, remember that?
Well,
And you know,
whether your designee.
I will
wants
tell
to-
you this, if the new chief, whoever the new chief is, comes in and says, I'm not doing that, I'll defer that to the battalion chiefs. I would tell you, for me, I'm not comfortable with the battalion chief. And it's nothing against you, Shane, honestly. I hope you understand that. It's just a closeness. And I think at some point, sometimes you make decisions because he's your buddy and not, and I'm going to probably use this more than once today, but it's kind of like a friend asking a friend, are you okay to drive home? I know you've had way too much to drink, but you're my friend. And when you tell me, yeah, I'm fine, how many of you armbar the guy and say, no way, I'm taking your keys, you're not driving home? It's harder. You're their friend. And it's really hard for you to say, no, I'm taking your keys, you are not driving home. And I feel like you guys are all friends, you're all, you know, family. And I think that somewhere along the line, that's got to have that higher level of supervision of who's making the decision that you're okay to drive. So. Thoughts on that?
The only concern I have with that is that the battalion chief is always on shift. There's always a battalion chief on duty. So you would need to ensure that there was back-end coverage to approve that stuff on weekends and stuff like that.
I don't
with
think
your
a trade,
designee.
I don't think a 72-hour trade has to be, I don't think a trade like that has to be approved within 5 minutes. I think that's one of those things, if you haven't planned ahead far enough to get a trade, then you're not going to get a 72-hour trade.
Okay.
I mean, that's a big deal. It's something that I think it does take consideration, it does take analysis. You know, my concern, Eric, is that I can say that you're on the ambulance today or you're not on the ambulance today, but we all know that right now that changes drastically. You know, I mean, you could have been scheduled on the fire truck and now you're on the ambulance because we've got 2 medics off, you know, or whatever.
Yeah.
And I don't have a crystal ball. I just don't have that crystal ball to know when that's going to happen. So are you guys comfortable with that? I mean, the approver of the 72-hour trade?
I think that's one that we certainly will have to put some more consideration into, but I don't think we'll say no to it right now. We need to talk about it.
Okay.
And we don't want to get anybody into a position where they're so, you know, exhausted from working 3 days or 4 days straight that they can't even, we don't want that either. So, you know,
Sure.
we want it to be safe for everyone too.
Well, that's ultimately, I mean, when I wrote this objective, I mean, one of the things that I've expressed this at the very beginning of this, is I don't want to be the chief that calls and has to tell your spouse that you're not coming home because you're tired. And you don't have to go very far. I found countless studies that go to CDC's website. CDC, okay, this isn't, you know, the CDC, they are science-based. They basically say 18 hours of awake, you're at 0.05 24 hours, you're at 0.1. You're above the legal limit. Legal limit's 0.08. CDC says that if you've been awake for 24 hours, and there's numerous studies, there's one out of California, Southern California, UCLA, that's basically saying, you know, and it's really the whole thing. It's just like being drunk in that your dexterity is down and your mentation is down, and you can't make rapid decisions. I'm not the one studying this stuff, so I'm just saying that that's the part that scares me, is that I don't want you to give the wrong drugs to a patient when you're too tired to recognize. I don't want you to step through a hole or go do a firefight that you're too tired to make that decision. And so I think you all want to go home. I mean, I assume that that's your goal, is to finish out your career and be safe. And so I assume that's what you want. I guess maybe I'll show you this, and this is an analysis that I did, and this is not science, it's probability, if that makes sense. So this is not actuals, because I haven't figured out a way to run actual calls at night. But I'll frame how I did this. I can run a report that says how many calls occurred on any given day, right? I can run that report for a year. I can just say, on January 1, this is how many calls you had. January 2, this is how many calls, all the way through December 31st. I can then say, well, what percentage of the calls happened, and in this case, I actually said what percentage of the calls happened between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. So basically what would be, if you were to look at our low call volume, 10 p.m. is actually pretty high call volume, but normally around 2 a.m. is when your calls start to fall off, get less and less. But basically between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., and we can pick a different time frame, and that was in different years. It was slightly different, but pretty close. And then, actually, it was not different for the years. It was 31.8% of the calls happened at that hour. And then I said, well, what percentage of the calls does ambulance 1, ambulance 2, ambulance 3, ladder 1, engine 2, engine 3, and engine 5 go on? And this is just the probability based on those percentages of how many calls. And this is 2020, so there's a year of data. I've separated, but you can see that this is for 86 or 7,860 calls. And using your the gal who did some of the sleep study for, I think it was the West Metro. She did some of those. She was basically saying anything above 2 calls, you start to get there. And so if you look at ambulance 1 in 2020, 219 times they got up twice, 58 times they got up 3 times, 3 times they got up 4 times. Ambulance 2, 249, 31, and then ambulance 3, 223, 95, and 15. Clearly the engines are generally speaking down in that 1 call per night. But they certainly have hit the 2 calls per night. And that's with 7,860. This is back, I wanted to run this one because this was our busiest year on record. And this was the 2017. And the interesting thing on this one was our 2 calls per night didn't go up a ton, but our 3 calls per night, at least for ambulance 1, went up quite a bit. Again, the one thing I don't know about this is obviously we have shifted zones a little bit. We've tried to pick up some things, so I really don't know whether part of that was due to the shift. But this clearly shows you that you're going to have nights where you get hammered. I mean, that you're not going to have nearly as much rest. And I wanted to run one more. I don't know if do you guys feel this? Because
This implies that we need more ambulances.
well, we've always known that, but I don't.
But, I mean, just as we're operating right now, before we go to a 4896.
Well, I mean, everybody, I don't think you can spin it around and just say, well, right now you get to go home and go to sleep. 3 calls in a night. We're not at our utilization rate, or in fact, we're away from our utilization rate as compared to what the statistic says that you're at a max utilization rate, if that makes sense. In 18, or 17, we were closer to our utilization rate. We're further away from that right now, if that makes sense. This is just this July, and I was going to ask the question. We're on track right now to have the highest month of calls. Do you guys feel that? Because if my projections are right, we're going to hit 850 calls this month, and that will be the highest we've ever hit in a month, any given month. And this isn't even a month. This is just 19 days of data. And ambulance 1 has already been out 6 times, 3 calls. Ambulance 2 4 times, and ambulance 3 9 times already. And I guess Shane, I would go back to the fact of the matter is right now there's no money to put another ambulance. So we can sit here and say we can put another ambulance on, but.
Right. But I guess my point that I'm just merely suggesting is we can't take something that we're doing now and say we're going to change the schedule. And so in order to change the schedule, we have to change something that we're currently okay with doing right now.
I'm not sure. No, that doesn't make sense.
We're okay how we're operating right now. And by changing the schedule, now we're saying it's not okay to do what we're currently doing?
Well, I think that the schedule impacts what we're currently doing. Right, wrong, or indifferent, the current schedule says, yeah, we can work your ass off for 24 hours, but after 24 hours, you're going to go home and get some sleep.
You have the opportunity. Some of us.
By going to, well, if you have other jobs or have other commitments, then those are other commitments. But the fact is, I mean, when I used to work out at the site and work at midnight, I didn't like going home and going to sleep during the day because that sucks. It's during the day. But guess what? My job says you work from midnight, and so I go sleep during the day, even though I don't sleep very well during the day. The point is, I think that this schedule currently, I'm just showing you that this is what is. And there is going to be an impact where guys are not getting very much sleep. And we're going to have to do something about it, which we're eventually going to get to. We're going to get to how we solve that.
Yeah.
So, and just so I'm understanding this, on, say it's 2020, we were.
2020?
Yeah, ambulance 1 was out 3 times, 10 and 6. Is that 58 shifts that happened on?
Yes, 58, so that's a day, right? 58 days.
58 days that happened.
That happened.
58 24-hour periods.
Yes.
8 a day.
Yes,
Okay.
right.
Okay. So we're looking at how many times does that impact an individual crew? I guess since we're talking about
That individual, this is an individual.
It's an individual
20
apparatus.
times a year?
Right, so it's going to impact a shift 20 times a year. Okay, so.
Yeah, I mean,
20
you divide it by 3 for the platoon, and that's what you're going to get.
20 of 120 shifts. And of course, the odds of that being on your first shift are half of that, so we're down to 10, probably. Maybe 10 times a year that we'll have to consider this as an issue.
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, the problem is this is a probability, and we
Right,
know that all
it's
calls are random.
Yeah.
I mean, hell, we could have had a high call volume on a given day, and that high call volume could have all been during the day, and none of it was at night. I mean, the other day, I saw, 7 calls out all at once, so. it's-
Yeah.
Our last go around.
It's just simply a probability matrix that it's by no means actual data saying that
Right.
this happened 58 times.
Right, but
on
it's
ambulance 1.
roughly, I'm just trying to kind of
Right.
extrapolate further from that and try to figure out how many times it impacts an individual.
Right. Sure.
And so we're going to reduce that again by, several factors.
Right.
And bring it down.
So I have to look at it, how is it impacting the whole department? You can look at it by it impacting the individual.
Right, but if we're talking fatigue, it's the individual's fatigue we're worried
Right.
about. And so we're getting down to, that less than 10 times a year, maybe, if we're, possibly, so in that range. And those are the things where I feel like there's differences in length of call, were they on the call for 3 hours, were they on the call for
Sure.
15 minutes? All that stuff kind of.
So our
And- and
average
that's
call
where-
time on a fire truck's 20 minutes, and our average call time on an ambulance, and I mean, call time is from assigned to in service,
Yeah.
is about 45 minutes. So that's, again, those are averages. Averages don't mean diddly squat. We can be on fires
Right.
for 6 hours and you can get canceled en route, and you were there before you left the station.
And
So-
I guess, for me, just looking entirely at these probabilities here and breaking it down further to the individual, I feel like a lot of that stuff that would be completely within the realm of the crew captain, and if not the crew captain, then the battalion chief, to make sure that, okay, these things are happening occasionally. It's not a real frequent issue that we deal with, but we are going to have to deal with it. But since they're infrequent enough, we can work things around within our crew or within the shift to say, okay, well, we can take care of this fatigue for these individuals here today.
So I do want to point out though, that what we're talking about, 2020 is actually a pretty low call volume as an annualized, which is why I looked at July. Well, that's why I looked at 2017, because 2017 was our largest on record for call volume. And then I looked at July simply from the fact that right now we're actually pretty close to being on track with what we had for 2017. We're going to undershoot 2017 just a little bit, but
At our current-
we're not done with the year, right? So I don't know when,
That's at our current trajectory.
yeah, I mean, when you look at, like I said, we're on trajectory to do 850 calls in the month of July, and we have never hit 800 calls in a single month.
Really? Wow.
So it's insane. Anyway,
That seems busy.
so, yeah, it does. I'm sure it seems really busy. All right, trade policy. So, from my perspective, I'm okay with the policy that says it's 72 hours would have to be approved. I'm not sure I would approve much myself. Just to be upfront and honest, my expectation, I just feel like working 72 hours is a long time. And I would want somebody else other than the battalion chief being the approver of that particular thing.
Would it be far enough removed to have the battalion chief of another platoon do it? Could the A platoon approve Cs so that it wasn't somebody that was, I'm just posing the question. Or would it need to be the ops chief?
I think
If we had to pick one of those two.
I think my perspective is it needs to be a non-union person.
I don't want to distract too much here, but I'm just kind of thinking back to your analogy earlier with the rested group versus the few individuals that are on the 72 that may be more fatigued. And so thinking about it, it seems like if somebody's they're working a trade for someone else at the end of their tour, so they've worked their 2 normal shifts, and then their 3rd day is their trade day. That's the day where they could be the most fatigued, but everybody around them is going to be fresh. So that's kind of like what we're doing right now. So maybe that kind of a trade wouldn't be as big a deal as where somebody wants to work their trade before their 2 days normally on, because then you got the group that's been off for 48, and the one guy that's, or does that even matter? Because by the time the guy gets to 72 hours, everybody around him is still on 48. And so,
Scott, let's go back.
I'm just trying
Part of
to-
the reason our policy says, generally speaking, 72 hours is not approved. I don't know how often they're being approved, because quite frankly, I don't wade into that very often. To me, 72 hours is just too long to be working, personally.
you feel like regardless of the circumstance.
Personally, I feel that way. I just feel like that's an excessive amount of time. The 48, again, it kind of goes, my point was, we've allowed the 48, and some people have used that as an analogy to say, oh, well, look, we can do 48 hour on a trade. And that's really where my analysis or analogy works, is because, because most of you are still only on your 24. And therefore, the 48 is okay because there's somebody else, a whole lot of other people, not just one, a whole lot of other people But I think when you're stretching into a 48-hour or a 72-hour, that's just a really long time on shift.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't think there's too many 72s going on right now, to be honest with you.
I can't imagine anybody wanting to personally, but.
There's a handful.
You know, I mean, I guess somebody throws me a real exception and, yeah, I don't, but I'd like to be the one that makes that decision in the end.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
I don't think that's insurmountable. I think we can come up with a solution to
Yeah.
that.
Okay. What else did you say? Did you say anything? I had trays and vacation. I didn't think we had anything else.
I think those are the big ones we have now. And then, we had talked about just some sort of a general fatigue policy that we
Yeah.
might put together. And maybe have some predefined strategies to manage it. And which really could apply now on a 24-hour shift. And maybe having a set of steps that you would go through to
Sure.
mitigate it, up to the worst case being removing people from the line, which I think would happen probably incredibly infrequently or never, but to have that as like a last step.
Sure. So, and I definitely think we have to have a fatigue policy, and I think you're right. Implementing in a progression is the right thing to go. You all know, I mean, Dr. Sandy told me 6 hours. He wanted uninterrupted sleep for medics for 6 hours. Don't know how that would ever happen. I've backed that up a little bit, and the one that I've read was actually, again, your doctor who did the analysis for West Metro. Her statement was 5 hours of uninterrupted sleep with a 90-minute catch-up provision at some point. And that's kind of, in my opinion, I think, I talked to Shane a little bit about this the other day, just, I think I have to make the assumption that you come to work fresh. And I literally want that in our document that says, our expectation is if you're doing 48 hours in a row, you come to work fresh. You didn't go run 100, and I'm sorry I'm throwing somebody under the bus with this, but you didn't go run a 100-mile marathon yesterday and then come to work. That's just, I can't stop it, but I'm going to assume that you came to work fresh. So we're starting at you have a full tank when you came to work. And then I think all of our fatigue is going to wrap around actual things. It's got, yeah, you can have a conversation. The problem is there's no, I can't stick a thermometer in you and pull it out and say, oh, you're fatigued to this level. There's currently no metric for that. If we ever get one, great. I'm pretty sure you could go down the road of having somebody do a dexterity and a mental acuity exam on somebody and finding how drunk they are or how impacted by fatigue they were. But short of that, I think we're going to have to kind of say, here are some things that can be done. But kind of where I'm leaning towards is that, and I don't know what the window is, but there's going to be a window, whether that's 8P to 10A, but somewhere in that window, you had to have an opportunity to get 5 hours of contiguous sleep. And if you didn't, then the question becomes, what do we do?
Could we use something that's a standard in other industries like concussion protocol?
We can.
If when your kid plays baseball or football for the high schools, they go in prior to being able to play, they do a concussion test, and that tests their mental acuity, their dexterity, and then if and obviously we're just spitballing here, but let's say we have this metric that says, okay, without 5 hours of sleep, so we decide our window, we determine that Eric has not had his 5 hours of sleep in that given window, and that we could send him over to a software that's already designed and say, can you pass this test and the test is designed to be based on Eric's current performance versus his past
Sure,
performance, right?
Yeah, he's established a baseline.
Right.
There's such a software
Yeah.
that actually measures mental acuity?
Uh-huh.
Hell yeah. Then I don't even think we need 5 hours. I think that ultimately end up using, if there's such a software, then we would just
Yeah,
apply.
my kids, two of my kids have had to do it.
So I
I've
don't-
done it and used it through the school district, so I don't
guess
know
I
if
would-
that's, I don't know.
Yeah, my only
I don't know
concern
much
would
about
be, I don't either, I don't know anything about it. My basic concept was, to my knowledge, there's no software or no mechanism that is easily, how do I say, to determine a person's,
Easily and objectively determined.
easily and objectively determine their mental state as it relates to this particular topic. I don't know whether concussion would translate. We would have to get maybe even Dr. Sandy to say, well, would this concussion protocol be a mechanism to do a hard and fast metric? If that,
Sure.
because then that alleviates everything, right? I mean, if I had that, if I had the little meter, I could put it on your head and it says, Scott, you're too tired. Then this is easy, right? Then it's super easy. We just say you have to demonstrate the recording and show that the recording was X. But to my knowledge, we didn't have that available. So I was shooting down the road of the 5 hours contiguous sleep. And then if that doesn't happen, we have to do something. This becomes where we get complicated, is what do we do? Because if we're saying you're too tired, that you're not capable of making decisions, then you're not safe for yourself or anybody else, which means I really can't have you running on a unit at all. And short of staffing, and this is where, in my opinion, this gets really dicey, and you guys don't want this either, I don't like pulling units off service. Because if the minute you pull a unit off service, you're basically signaling to everybody else that we don't need that unit.
Right.
And so the minute you say, well, we really don't need that unit,
And my biggest concern is trying to rationalize this policy now, because right now we don't do that. Right now, we send guys on a transfer to Salt Lake at 2 in the morning. And they haven't, and they will be up from 2 until 10 in the morning. And so they have gone 24, let's say they woke up at 7 in the morning, so 27 hours with no sleep, and we have no policy to direct that now. So,
well, that's not true, Shane. We have a policy that says we'll
Sure.
put them in a hotel room and let them sleep.
but not, but like I said, now we're changing it to, if you feel tired, you can do this, and we're taking that policy and going from a debate on how do we go to the schedule to now we're changing our policy because it's something that's better for the department.
Well, I don't think
Right.
it's fair to say that it's just better for the department. I think you have to look at.
No, and
the
I don't
totality
mean
of
department,
this.
I don't mean by staff, I mean better for us as a department.
So let's go back. I mean, I've tried to ask you guys for different criteria. You look at NWCG. NWCG says maximum 24 hours of IA, and that if you're going to go beyond 24 hours, it's only under the most extreme circumstances. You have to justify the hell out of it, and if anybody got hurt when you went over that 24 hours, there's hell to pay, basically, right? I mean, and that's for IA only. Otherwise, they're 2-to-1 work rest ratio. So I'm not asking for 2-to-1 work to rest ratio. And in terms of the transfer, yeah, you're right. Sometimes the transfer goes out late and does get back, and that definitely pushes the envelope of what you're talking about. And personally, I don't like it. We've been trying to work with the hospital to change that, but that's different. Now I have to have you come back and work another 24 hours. And so I think that is a different scenario, and I have to keep you fresh for the next 24 hours. Now, if all's well, if you don't get hammered and you do get that 5 hours of contiguous sleep and you're able to take a 90-minute refresher according to your own scientist, then all is well, right? The question becomes when that doesn't happen, and what's our plan? And when I say I want us to be clear on expectations, I feel like we need to be upfront about what that looks like. Because I don't think it's fair to our citizens or you to expect you to work beyond that capability, because it's dangerous for you, it's dangerous for the citizens. So Scott, in terms of the fatigue policy, I guess, Shane, if you have something that, you know, if you want to do a little homework and see, I mean, you know Dr. Sandy as well as I do, talk to him and see whether he thinks that concussion
Okay.
protocol would work, because I have no idea.
Yeah, I don't either.
Thankfully, I was born before the concussion protocol, and all my kids were grown long before we ever had even concussion protocol, so I don't know whether there's a metric. That would make it a lot easier, in my opinion, because some people can catch 2 hours here, 2 hours there, and seem to be rested. A lot of people can't, and
I guess, just thinking about, I'd hate to, you know, pick a hard and fast number like that. You know, tie the department's hands and the supervisor's hands and the individual's hands when people are arrested, you know, if they can maintain their fatigue level at a low level through other means, whether it be napping earlier in the day. You know, maybe they did go to take a nap at 5 o'clock, you know, and they slept until, you know, dinner time, and you know, and then they were up for most of the night, but they're still functioning because they got that rest earlier, or whatever reason. Is there any way that we could get behind maybe something like, if you didn't get those 5 hours, maybe the first step would be that you have to, the BC has to interview that crew. The BC has to sit down with that crew and interview them and determine, you know, are these guys okay? Do we need to go further with some sort of an evaluation, or, you know, as a BC, can they say, I sat down, I talked to him, I asked him, you know, a series of questions maybe, and regarding, you know, even there's sleepiness tests that can be done, those exist, with, you know, questions are already figured out with the, you know, scales and how to identify those things. Can the BC maybe do that and just say, these guys are good, or no, these guys need...
I'm not okay with a subjective test. If we have an objective test, then I'm absolutely okay with an objective test. You know, here's the deal, Scott, and this just comes back to the same concept. You're a friend asking a friend, how do you feel? I feel great, I can drive home. The fact is, even the data suggests that the person, when asked, can you drive home, they think they can. They think they're okay. I talked to a guy the other day that was saying, man, if I get to a certain point, I think he's a prison guard, and he says, man, I get to a certain point and I almost don't feel tired, but it's almost like that weird buzzing, energized feeling. And he says, it takes me a little while to unwind. And I feel like you have, I think asking an individual, how do you feel? Do you think you're okay to work? I just think that's the wrong way. I think if we have, whether it's a sleepiness test, if there's such a thing, hadn't heard of that. If we have an objective way of gauging a person's, you know, my preference would be something that's measuring your mental acuity and your dexterity, whatever that looks like.
How open would you be to accepting other departments' policies?
Well, from what you told me earlier, there were no policies. So
Would that indicate that there isn't a problem, or would that indicate they're not addressing the problem?
I think that there's two answers to that. One is, I think that indicates that they may have a different scenario than us and may be willing to do different things. You know, you and I talked about this. We are not the Treasure Valley. I mean, if you look at the Treasure Valley and if you talk to the guys, the way they interact, Meridian, Napa, Caldwell, Eagle, Boise Fire, they all in effect act as one. They in effect act borderless. It's a whole lot easier to say, hey, we're going to just kind of quietly take this engine out of service when I've got 13 others surrounding me who can help.
But that would be in their policies, right?
I don't know if it would be in their policies. I don't know. I don't know how they do that. But I'm just telling you, it's different for that agency than us. The only person that really could come help us at all is Chubbuck. I mean, they have one unit, so they're not a ton of backup. So we're in a different environment. I don't know what their call volume is. West Metro is really the same way. So is San Jose. They're all departments that are kind of situated in a fairly metroplex that has a lot of surrounding departments. And so it is different for them. It is different in their scenario, not like us. This is one of the problems that we face as our department. We are a silo department. There's nobody else for us to turn to for that extra help. And so, I think an objective fatigue, some mechanism of determining fatigue objectively, or I think you're going to have to go down to fixed. I'm open for discussion, Scott. I mean, if you want to say, well, we're tracking and I have to log my sleep and I'm going to log my sleep and yep, I took a 2-hour nap at 5 o'clock and then I took another 2-hour nap at 10 o'clock and then I got, because I was planning, it was a Friday night, I knew I was going to get hammered, and you want to log sleep and we want to demonstrate, I don't know, that's going to be something that I'm going to have to sell to either Dr. Sandy and the city. And I'm going to have to do a little research to say, does enough 2-hour blocks, because it's your own scientist, I'm just going to say that, it's your own scientist.
It was a study, it was one study we cited.
It's the one you cited.
For information only.
And I was
It wasn't
willing to
our
go
scientist.
her route. Her route was 5 hours.
Never met her.
Her route was you need 5 hours of contiguous sleep in a 24-hour period. And then a 90-minute, I don't remember what she called it, but it was like a catch-up provision. So I'm just using hers. I'm like, okay, that's, Dr. Senni said in 6 hours. 5 is a little less, gives you an easier target to hit. But then she said you needed a 90-minute nap somewhere along the line in order to catch that up. I'm less argumentative about what that 98 minutes look like, because I do know, and I feel it myself, is, having a good block of sleep is important.
So let's say we did have an objective test.
Sure.
Like you're talking
We
about.
have a fatigue thermometer.
Yeah.
We stick it somewhere.
So how in your vision, how would you see this coming about? So would you have this window, say 10P to 10A on the first night? If they don't get that 5-hour block, would you bring this test to the person and say, do this test, and if they pass, then they're good, and if they fail, how do you see it happening? We're just looking for ideas.
And I don't know, that part I don't know. I'm assuming, but then, that's one of those things, like, I don't know what happens when we, so they don't get their 5 hours that first night, that's not going to get better, right? I mean, that's part of the problem, is it's not going to get better throughout the day. So then what am I going to measure you hourly? And then what happens when you finally hit the fatigue? And if you really think about our call volume is, it's pretty much peaked from about noon all the way through 1800. It dies off a little bit and then starts to wane all the way through the night. And it's its lowest level around 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. is its lowest possible. So your highest probability of getting sleep is in that pretty narrow window.
Right.
So it's not going to get better if I don't get you your sleep in that window. The odds of me, pulling you through the next night is going to be pretty tough. So I don't know what that looks like. I really don't. I'm just being honest about that. I mean, I think my goal, and I think you guys' goal is, we want rested firefighters who are making good decisions, that go home after 25 years, 28 years, and live a full life that's satisfying and rewarding. And so I just want to make sure that that's where we're at.
And I think that's why we started this, is because the studies show this schedule, instead of focusing on the 48, the schedule of the 4896 versus this 9-day cycle is far better overall. Right? I think that's why we.
But
that's
the
why
person that referenced that also said, for busy stations, it doesn't work so well. So the acuity of the, you're talking about, and I think that when we look at this data, probably for all the engines, it would work probably very well, and for the most part be easy to do, with a few exceptions, which we'll eventually get to. But the ambulances currently, I'm not sure we're going to get there, if that makes sense. I just don't know how we're going to get an ambulance to get that kind of rest, given what I see and what I suspect is going to happen at least. And this year could be a bubble only because we're, rebounding after a lot of austerity from COVID. Could be that we're going to peak out and then drop back down again for a while. So, Eric, I guess ultimately my goal is to get the 5 hours of sleep and then say, okay, you're good to go. How do we, where do we go to get there? I don't know. And my preference is an objective. If we have,
So
it's
how
either
would
a
you do
hard
it?
metric or we have an objective.
And so how would you see it happening? Would you see them taking a unit out of service, calling in overtime? How would you like to have it dealt with if we went to this 5-hour and we couldn't get 5 hours through the night? And I said, okay, it's 10 o'clock, you didn't get your 5 hours. Would I call in overtime? What would you see it looking like?
Well, I think kind of using the analogy of progressively increasing, I think obviously any on shift, right now we have, 3 extras, I think, beyond the vacation schedule. Is that correct? So we would use those 3 individuals to distribute and
Okay.
do that first. Part of this, as we come down to what do we do with an individual unit station, I think that shifting people around within that first level is obviously our most desirable because it doesn't cost anything and we're not shutting a unit down. I'm not a fan of shutting units down.
No.
I would call in overtime when we're shutting units down.
I don't think
I
any of
don't
us
think
are.
anybody is.
We're recording, so I want to be very clear. I believe that has to be part of this conversation, and it's not bad or good. It is what it is. It's the cost of this schedule, and at some point, the city council has to bear that cost. Because I can tell you as a fire chief, I'm constantly berated for why is your overtime so high? I don't believe that. It is what it is. I've always believed that. We have X number of units, I need to fill it, and if I have people that are sick, then I'm gonna have to call in overtime to solve the problem.
That could certainly be one of those metrics that you're looking for, is how this impacts our overtime.
Absolutely.
And one of the things with that is, really, we're gonna have to get on schedule so that we know, rather than just what if and this to death.
Right.
So I guess just so I'm tracking here, so we're looking for, maybe there is a hard and fast number of hours that you need to be able to achieve, and maybe it's 5, maybe it's less, maybe it's more, I don't know right now. But if we, and I'm just trying to make sure I'm following here, if we don't achieve that rest level in a certain time frame, and that time frame could be 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. or it could be 5 p.m. to 10 a.m. the next day. It could. But if we don't achieve it, there's several levels still of things we could do to
Right.
address that. We could pull someone off the truck and say, we're going to replace you with another person on shift already, and put you in a room and say you need to get some sleep. How about just reassignment to a slower unit?
Absolutely.
And so we maybe don't guarantee it, but we increase the probability of them getting that rest greatly.
Yeah, I mean, Scott, I think that
really-
part of this is that the variability, right? I mean, to say, okay, well, you're supposed to have 5 hours of sleep or you're not rested, okay? And again, I don't know that 5 hours is the right metric.
Sure, but that's the number we're using right now.
We're using that number of 5 hours. If we're saying that if you don't get the 5 hours, then you're not capable of doing the job, then for me to say, well, I'm going to roll the dice quietly and put you out at station 5 and hope you don't do that, I think that's problematic. I feel like that's probably a risk that we shouldn't be taking, because at this point, in effect, we basically said you have reached the level, and I'm going to just use the word, but it's not really, you've reached that level of intoxication. So Scott, you're really intoxicated. I would normally send you home, but instead I'm going to send you to bed, but if you get a call, you still have to go. I just don't think that sits well. If we're going to assume, and I don't have any reason to assume otherwise, that that's not where we're at, that this is not, I mean, the CDC, there's many documentation, studies, scientific studies that have said, being awake this long, this is the end game, you are that. And, it says 18 hours, 0.05, 24 hours, 0.1. So that's a pretty definitive number. I get it. I get that everybody is unique. They're individual. Not everybody comes to work with a full tank. Not everybody But I don't know how else to do that, because, well, you guys have one of your own members that went home sick because he couldn't go to training on day 2. Didn't help your argument for 4896, by the way. Are you aware of this? So we had a guy, we took off shift, sent him to Idaho Falls, went to some training, said, hey, I don't want to go back on shift. We said, you have to go back on shift. You have training tomorrow, but this wasn't covered time. He basically called in sick and said, well, I don't sleep well on shift, and I wouldn't be able to go to training. That same guy, how do I take that person and say, wait a second, you're not willing to sit at a desk in training, but now you want to do 48 hours where you're doing CPR, running into burning buildings? I mean, the worst thing that could happen is if you go to this training and fall asleep is you don't learn, or you maybe bump your noggin on the table. It seems kind of, and so.
I don't know anything about that, but I would, I would hesitate to base too much off of one incident when there could be a lot of other variables at play. I have no idea.
Well, sure, I mean, there's always variables, but my point is this: how much does the department own? Let's just say you do get the 5 hours of sleep. You had the opportunity for 5 hours. And what if you decided to stay awake and watch movies all night? Or what if you decided to, or you just couldn't sleep, to no fault of your own? And that's the part, that's where the objective fatigue meter is even difficult, because you're still at liberty to do what you do, right? I mean, I don't have a mechanism to say, we had guys that would stay up all night watching movies, writing books, doing whatever they did. So even, for me, part of the objective of 5 hours is, well, you had 5 hours of opportunity. Now, whether you took the opportunity or not is beyond my control. Or even, heavens, there are guys that you don't sleep. Sometimes you just don't sleep. And so then, if the next morning you laid in bed for 6 hours stirring, and I do a fatigue meter, and now you're fatigued, now what do I do? And who owns that? I'm just saying that I don't know. Those are those things that make this challenging, because ultimately you're talking about, well, that's the department's, it's not the department's fault that you laid there in bed for 6 hours. You're not old enough to have those problems, I guess. I don't know. I wake up all the time at wrong hours of the day. But anyway, we have a good start on this. I don't think we're going to solve this. I think something that's more objective, some kind of number. If some of you guys want to do some looking into seeing if there's an equivalent, like if we could say 2 hour blocks, that we have 2 hour blocks of time.
Do you know what Idaho Falls does?
I don't. But they, they're different than us.
They're probably
They have
similar.
130 employees, and they have,
But I think their call per unit is very similar to ours, maybe even
I thought
less.
they said less, right, they have less.
Or I'm sorry, maybe even more.
I don't think so, 'cause I think
When
last time I looked
when
at
I ran the
10,000 calls.
numbers the last time for unit, just for ambulances, I think their ambulances were going on more calls than ours.
Well,
Per unit call.
I will tell you that I've kind of taken, when you told me nobody else had any policies, I just assumed a lot of them are different. Treasure Valley is certainly way different than us. Coeur d'Alene's way different, because Coeur d'Alene has good working relationships with Kootenai Fire and their surrounding fire departments. So we're probably more like Idaho Falls, but I haven't, Dwayne told me they don't have any policy. But I think this will probably be one of the ones that's going to be our challenge, to get through.
And I guess,
Is that impossible? I don't think so. I think it's possible.
since we're talking about that again, if a lot of these other departments don't have specific policies because they haven't needed them, it would indicate that it's probably not likely to be a huge problem for us either. I think it's reasonable to have a general policy like we're talking about, but a lot of these very specific instances that we're bringing up, a lot of those I don't know that we need to worry about until, or I don't want to say until they become a problem, but if if we have a general policy in place that will cover our bases, all of the extra, what ifs that are very specific, we should be able to handle with even minor, I guess, just.
So I can tell you that that won't fly on the city side. The city wants this to be specific.
And I guess we can't plan for every single instance.
I don't think we're trying to plan for it. We're basically saying, if fatigue happens, at what level and what will we do about it? And having that articulated. One of the conversations is, what are we going to do? How do we deal with that first fire? The big fire on day one. That pretty much you're working all night. Scott, I don't care what the policy is. We're going to write it down. We're going to say this is what we do. Whether that means it's an all-call, and we're going to have everybody come in, and then we'll start cycling people through, and when we get the crew that's on their 5 hours of rest, then we'll send everybody else home.
I feel like that one's pretty easy because
Okay,
that is our policy.
Then that's what we'll do.
I mean, that's what we do now. If we have a fire that's that big in the middle of the night, it's an all-call, and we call in everybody, and we start working rehab, and I don't know.
It's going to be a little more challenging. It is what we do, but we still have the basics that you go home after 24 hours. Yes, you work a little long sometimes, where you work till 9 o'clock in the morning, 10 o'clock in the morning, sometimes, but you're still going home. In this case, people aren't going home, and that'll become my next conversation we can talk about as policies, if you want, is that I think we're going to have to change overtime policies. I think that at some point, Charlotte Fire, we were, I think, able to staff 3 rigs. That's not a full platoon. If I'm having to cover a whole platoon because that whole platoon's up working and I need to cover a whole platoon for 4 hours, because we're not shutting rigs down, right? We agree to that. Can we all agree that we're not going to shut rigs down? That's bad form for us. We are running what I call the bread and butter model. Our bread and butter is that we have the staffing for a 2,000 square foot residential structure home, residential structure fire. We do not have a strip mall staffing level. We don't have a high-rise staffing model. So part of our response capability is callback. At least right now, not unless we change, a lot. So, one of the things that I'm concerned about is that we're getting pretty limited callback as it is. And I don't think 4896 is going to make that easier, because I think 2 things are going to happen. One is you have 4 days off. So what do you do on 4 days off? You go somewhere. You're not in your backyard. You're not at home. Maybe. I don't know. I told somebody this the other day. I said, I love the schedule you guys are on, because I got all my honeydews done in the 2 days in between, which always meant my 4 days were 100% protected. So now your 4 days can both do both. But anyway, I'm not here to tell you which way you want to go. I'm just here to say that I think that callback is going to become more complicated, and I think we're going to have to come up with something. And I think the other part of this is I think people are going to probably start living from further away, and they will just be off the chart. San Jose, they had a residency requirement. From implementation forward, they had a residency requirement. Would you entertain a residency requirement so that we don't have people that are living in Boise or other places? Because the fact is, and this is for you guys too, your overtime pool just got cut. Because they're not going to take overtime. They'll take overtime if it's on a fringe, but they're not going to take overtime.
I think a lot of that's speculation. Right now we're speculating on what you think might happen. I think what we need to go back and focus on is what is really important and what are we required to move to the schedule change. And we can speculate that overtime's going to be hard or trades are going to be hard, but I don't know that is critical for moving forward with. Let's say we want to, for example, make a policy for mandatory overtime, right? none of us know what that would look like. We've never had it to a certain extent. I mean, the policy now is pretty simple. It says you can't leave until you're properly relieved. So technically, if no one shows up, you're mandatorily held there and we'll pay you overtime. But I don't think that, we have that policy. I don't think to change the policy to look something different is important to moving forward. That's something that I think is important, and I think we need to address it because it could be a problem, but
So
I don't think it's required to move to the 4896 schedule.
So I think the difference, Shane, is that maybe you don't see that, but I don't feel like, I think the city feels like we have to have done our best to anticipate likely outcomes. And just so you know, I plan on being out here by 4, if that's okay. We can be out sooner if you want. No more than 2 hours. So if you want to call it quits, we can round up and meet, but.
No, we keep going at 30 minutes.
Okay. I feel like it's not, part of our system needs overtime to come in. And I think that, and you say it's not required, and yet, but what happened? I am concerned that side of our system may collapse, okay? And then what do I do? If that makes sense. Because after the fact, it's still after the fact. It will be simple. You said it the other day, you don't want to make it so expensive that the city can't afford it. But the fact of the matter is if that side of the system collapses and the only solution is to go hire 2 more fire stations and 2 more fire engines, the city can't afford that. That's just not going to happen. So if and at the very beginning you said, well, we need more ambulances. There's no more funding for the ambulance right now. Could we get there? Maybe. But as of right now, there's no more funding for the ambulances. I mean,
I guess, if I can interject there, I feel like a lot of these comments that Shane's making, and the ambulance one included, are more just pointing to the fact that we have a lot of issues, and they exist now under our current schedule, and there's no real concrete evidence or indication that they're going to get worse under the 48. And so, I guess, do we need to worry about them at that detailed level if they aren't necessarily tied to the schedule? We have the issues now, just like, our model is the bread and butter, 2,000 square foot residential. That's our, we're dealing with that whether we're on this schedule or 48, that doesn't change. We have to fill our need with callback. That doesn't change whether we're on this schedule or the 48. And so, and like the ambulance thing, we could use another ambulance if we had the money right now, or on the 48, it doesn't matter. So I guess, are we getting too far into the weeds on some of these things that we don't really have any real good reason to believe that they're going to be a problem? We can see how they could possibly be a problem, right? There's always ways to look at and say, well, under these circumstances it could happen, but is it likely to happen? Is it something that's really needs to be at the forefront of this?
I think so. I think you're wrong, Scott. I think when you talk about it as if, well, we do it here and we would do it on the 4896, as if it's no different, I think is almost ignoring the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is you cannot be awake for 48 hours straight.
Well, and sure, I mean, I think that the fatigue question, there is good reason to address that because that's a known difference between the two schedules. But the question of callback or the question of, where our staffing is, those, I guess I don't see the same.
Well, so San Jose, in their implementation manual, they implemented a residency requirement. So clearly they felt it was. I feel it will too. I know that a lot of the guys that are interested in the 4896 are the ones that live further away. I know that the reason the 4896 started was because people wanted to live further from where they worked, because in most cases, It started in your California cities where they couldn't afford to live in San Francisco Bay Area. They couldn't afford to live in downtown LA. They couldn't afford to live where they wanted to. And the 4896 was born out of the fact that, well, we're having to commute from so far away from our place of business that I need this opportunity. And then that morphed. I also know this, so, to say that this is an unknown is not true. We know that there are people that live in Coeur d'Alene and commute all the way back to LA. Okay, so those people, and that works, okay? So this is the problem that I think is different. LA is a huge, huge city. They have a ton of resources. They've browned out thirds of their department at times during downturns, okay? We're not that. If I have a third of my department who goes and lives in Coeur d'Alene, who thinks they can commute in here, that's going to change our dynamic. And we're not the size of some of those departments where they can afford to absorb some of that, which is the difference. We are different. We don't have a whole lot of people that can do that.
I was just going to say, on our salary, do you think anybody realistically could live in LA or Coeur d'Alene and commute like that?
What? Go ahead.
I may not be completely in tune with the body, but I guess from my perspective, I don't see our group doing that on a large scale.
So then you wouldn't be.
I could see.
You wouldn't be opposed to a residency requirement.
One or two. Well, we already have a lot of members who do not live in town.
So you do a residency requirement that was proactive. That was upon implementation.
I guess why aren't we worried about them now?
Yeah, and I wouldn't see any.
Like, why aren't we worried about the guys that live in Idaho Falls currently? If they're part of that model, why aren't we thinking about bringing them in as it sits now?
And I guess, I don't, I think like I said earlier, I don't want to take, very specific examples and say that's the rule. But I'm going to do it real quick. One of our members who does live up, far north of town is one of our highest, contributors to that overtime need.
Right.
And so, to say that it's guaranteed that, people are going to leave town and then they're not going to come back or they're not going to show up and help with overtime, it doesn't seem as clear that is the way that things will go as maybe some other things, some of these other issues we have, like fatigue. Fatigue is a very clear issue that we will face, but these other ones, I don't know that they're going to.
Well, I don't know either. I guess, again, part of this is talking through some of this. I think that if you're working 48 hours, the odds are you're going to have more and more people that live further away. Eric, I think that generally speaking, I guess my answer would be we have relatively few people that are living outside. I think that when you're working a 48-hour schedule, that's going to grow. I think it's inevitable that it's going to grow. It becomes more attractive. I think we lost somebody to Salt Lake because his wife couldn't get a job here. But if we had been on a 48-hour schedule, he probably would have stayed. I think we've lost people that, we had a candidate that was from Boise. His wife, he decided he didn't want to come here because it wouldn't work. So I think it's going to happen, if that makes sense. And it's going to grow. It's not going to get less. Because right now, what's keeping us at least somewhat limited in that is the fact that you're having to come back every other day. It's a hurdle or it's a barrier to somebody living further and further away. And you're absolutely correct. Obviously, monetary is further, is also a thing. I'm not implying that somebody's going to live in LA. But the further they get, if they live in Boise, they're not available for that big event. When we call in for the Charlotte Fire, when we do an all-call, they're not available, right? Can we agree that they would not be available? They're not going to come in. They're not going to drive 3.5 hours.
Not as quickly, anyway.
Well, they're not going to drive 3.5 hours. The fact is, short of us being into something that's way extended, but in that case, we're going into a different model anyway. We're going into basically a national response model. And so,
What would you see it looking like?
you mean residency requirement?
No, I mean, let's say we go to the 4896, and is that what you think would be the solution, is a residency
I
requirement?
don't know. Really, I'm just trying to talk through a concern that I think is a basic concern. I think that our model, there's two things that I see. Right now, our model really kind of does rely on overtime as part of filling in the gaps in terms of staffing on an incident. Not to mention filling in the gaps on staffing shortages and all those other things, but the incidents are probably the more timely thing. And that the 4896, I think, will impact, not probably, but will impact, because I think you're going to have more people that are going to be less available to come back. Because ultimately, you're kind of in a if you're on your 48, whoever's coming up next probably doesn't want to come in on overtime because they're about to go on shift. So they're really not interested in overtime because they're about to go on shift. So really, the only group that you're going to have in overtime availability is this one group that is, whatever, 2 days out or 4 days out on any given day. Okay, the probabilities are you're going to get less and less people that are available just by that virtue, because quite frankly, you're already working 48 hours. I'm pretty confident most of you guys don't want to work 52 or 70 hours because that's going to become less desirable. So working on top of that for the group that would be extending their own shift is going to be resistant. I guess I would think you would see that would become less desirable. So then the only people that are likely going to do this might be the ones that are the 1/3 of the department who is sitting out of ways and they're like, yeah, I can go in for a couple hours. And that's for the emergency callback. And then I think that as you get people that as you cast your net of where you live wider, then the further out you get, those people. And Mickey takes a lot of overtime, but a lot of the overtime he takes, sorry, I said it by name, but we all know who you're talking about, but a lot of the overtime he takes is, the ones that has a little bit of flexibility in terms of, hey, yeah, we got a transfer that's going in 2 hours, can you be in? Or is it this? It isn't the, hey, the world's burning down, we need you here right now.
So what kind of metrics would we be looking at to look at that? I mean, we use the word I think and I feel like, and, but obviously we have no data until we go to it, but what would we be?
I think the things that you would look at.
We would have to come up with a, mandatory overtime if we needed to, but what would be, would we look at how many times we call in overtime now and it's not filled, and does that increase with the 4896? Is that something that
I guess you could look at that and say that is some metric that we could look at, absolutely.
Because I'm trying to come up with a system with a way. I don't want to invalidate your concerns. I mean, I think we want to address your concerns as the fire chief and the city's concerns as the manager of this department, this department, and so.
Well, ultimately, we want to satisfy the public, right?
Absolutely.
Because ultimately, the public is their fire that we all want to put out, and we want to be able to put it out as effectively as possible.
And so, but I guess at the end of the day, we really can't address every individual what if, but we want to be able to come up with a policy that says, okay, we're looking at this metric. We want to make sure that, we're citizens of the community too, and so we don't want to pay any more taxes than we want. We want a fiscally responsible government, and so we want to provide the best service that we can to the community. We don't just want this to blow up our overtime budget or to blow up anything else, so we want this to work for both parties. I think that's why we brought this, we think it's going to benefit us as the fire department and the city
So,
with
and I-
the same service and lower cost.
So maybe
So-
we monitor the callback success rate. And we can figure out what we've had over the last year. I mean, Crescent should have all that information in it. And then we can monitor our success rate for the next year going into the schedule and see if there is an impact. Or maybe not in a year, depending on, if there is a significant impact, like if it's large enough, we'll see it much quicker than a year, but, we can take a look at it, and if there's need, then bring it to SOG committee, and we have mechanisms already in place to say, oh, we have a problem, we need to fix this, or labor management and SOG, and we can.
well, the only problem, Scott, is that, and this is where I think the city, and this is where this becomes a little bit more complicated. We say we have mechanisms to fix things, but we also know that when it's something that you don't want to give up as a body, then you just say, no, we're not interested in going down that road, and therefore it doesn't get fixed, and so that's not really a solution, and it ends up in negotiations, and that becomes problematic as well. So I'm just being honest that we're all fine with things that are low impact, but if there's something, such as a residency requirement, I think I know you guys would argue against residency requirements. That's just going to be your position. You're generally going to argue against a residency requirement. So I think that ultimately, we're going to have to sort some of this stuff out here and not just simply say, well, we'll react to it if it happens. I think we're going to probably be the opposite. We're going to react a little bit more heavy on the front end, and then if it doesn't play out to what we think it did, then we can loosen the coat strings or the strings on the other end, if that makes sense. Because I feel like, like I said, so let's do a residency requirement, and in 3 years, if we find that that's not necessary and we're not having people that are interested in living far away, then maybe we could undo that and say, well, we don't think that's necessary. It was something that San Jose recommended. That's what they did in their initial implementation, was that they said, we're going to, grandfather everybody who currently is here, but anybody going forward, they had a mileage residency requirement.
I was under the impression we tried to do that residency requirement early in the department's history.
Oh, we used to have residency requirements. Right up until Chief Wolf, I think, wanted to live outside the city. Long time before my time, Shane. I don't know.
The city tried to implement a residency requirement for all employees, and the fire union did not go for it, which is ultimately what changed it back to what it is now. And I know that for a fact because my dad worked for the city. He was in animal control and lived out in Black Rock and had to move to town because of the city changing the residency requirement, but ultimately that was reversed.
Well, I don't have that much history, so.
I guess since we're talking about some of these things, like just as a point or question of procedure, maybe Andy, you can weigh in on this, but I feel like some of these things that are just being floated, residency requirements, if there's any kind of mandatory overtime requirements, things like that, seem like they should be handled between the negotiation teams more so than in this committee, because that seems more of a contract,
Big deal.
a negotiated item, where at this point we have negotiated, we're going to go to the 48, and we're working within that bubble. And some of these other things are maybe bigger than that, and maybe outside that bubble. Even though they're obviously related, we'd have to be careful about what we're.
Well, and that's, I guess, we'll take that read. I mean, in the end, I'm not sure that's not the way I've understood what I'm supposed to do. So
what do you think about, and this kind of plays into number 8 you got down here, is what if we had like a quarterly meeting, and if we had to do it in this type of setting where it's transparent to everyone, but it's specifically for this schedule, and we can keep an eye on the metrics, and we can watch things, see what's actually going on. And if we feel like something is becoming, or if we can forecast something in the future, like too many people are moving out of town, 3/4 of our department moves to Jackson Hole or whatever, then we can start steering in that direction and trying to solve that. Or if overtime's getting out of hand, things like that, we can follow it. But I think it's going to be hard to dot every I, cross every single T over the course of the entire department before we begin. That's my feeling. So if maybe, I'm just throwing out an idea, if we had a quarterly meeting, or if something major happened, we could convene and sort it out. And I'm not saying we should get rid of all these topics, but would that be something that would be helpful?
So, I think it certainly probably would be helpful, but Eric, I think it comes back to what Scott just said. We just signed a 3-year contract. If everything that we're going to talk about ends up having to be negotiable, anything that is a material change, then that doesn't give us a lot of hope for any change, right? Meeting or no meeting, so we're going to meet, we're going to look at each other, and we're going to say, well, this is a problem, and you're going to say, well, that's your problem, figure it out. I mean, because that's where I think, the rubber meets the road. At some point, we're going to have to sort out how to cope with these things in a way that continues to offer, the best service we can and maintains the safety of our firefighters and the public.
Well, and MOUs are always an option, It's not like it's cast in a granite rock on the side of the hill. We can change the contract if it's something weird happens, right?
Easier said than done. I think the truth be told is that, these two things, your desire to sit at the table is commensurate with your desire to move the 4896. Once you're there, your desire to change other things becomes less enticed, less directed.
But it almost feels like you're using, I want this and this and this to move you to the 4896.
I feel like I'm trying to suggest things that I see as problems. Do I have a crystal ball and know that there'll be problems? I guess maybe not. I know you're going to be fatigued. I know that one for sure. I know that the schedule will impact who wants to take overtime.
But you also don't know that either of those are going to be a problem. You don't know that I feel like we're currently fatigued. That's why we're trying to go to this schedule. Yeah, we have difficulty getting overtime, but every item that you cited is part of the reason we currently have overtime getting filled now. We have trouble getting B platoon to come in at 2:00 in the morning for a transfer because they work tomorrow, right now. Or, sorry, not B platoon, but it'd be A tomorrow. But we're not going to solve every problem here. But what we need to do is work with, form an outline, and then deal with the problems as they come up.
I don't think that's going to fly on the city side to just simply say we're going to deal with the problems as they come up. I think that's going to be problematic.
And so are these their biggest concerns for implementation?
These were the things that we wanted to start with to talk about. I wanted today to be kind of, I think we've moved in some good direction. I think that there are concerns. And I'm not positive. I don't personally know how to handle them. Do I want residency requirements? I think you're implying that this is like I'm trying to get something. What I want to do is protect the system. I want to make sure that the system works. I feel like you say your solution is, well, I want to go to 48 hours. Well, to me, that seems odd because if you're fatigued, then maybe you should be working 12 hours. Because, maybe a 12-hour shift is a better shift than working 48 hours in a row. Because I think that what the 48-hour does is exacerbates what is, if that makes sense. So, yeah, you're fatigued after 24. Well, if you're fatigued after 24, I think you're going to be doubly fatigued after 48. Some of you won't. Station 5 certainly won't. Station 4 certainly won't.
We got to remember the flip side of the fatigue with the schedule and the better rest on those 4 offs, and that, I guess, like you said earlier, we're coming in with a full tank, but hopefully with the 48, everything that we understand about it, all the research that's been done, all the testimony we've gotten from guys that work that schedule, is that when you come in at the beginning of your shift, coming in with a full tank still, but your tank is bigger, I guess would be the analogy. So, you know, it's that acute versus chronic fatigue issue. And so.
And your
just to
scientist
say
said that after 2, that is null and void. After 2 calls in the hours between 10 and 6.
I don't know that it was null and void. I think it was it may be an issue.
Okay, I mean, I'm not the one doing the study. I've just read what was written, and it basically said that after 2 calls, you're not very well rested. So I guess part of this is there are consequences of the 48-hour schedule. And to build a framework that ensures that the department still can continue to function more or less as it did, to ensure that you guys are safe, to ensure that the public is safe. Those are kind of, in my opinion, those guiding things. And if, you say we can impact it later, but Eric, you said, well, if I got 20 guys that all of a sudden take the job, not that we'll ever get 20, but let's just say the 7 guys. What if the 7 guys that we had just hired were all from outside? Once we have 7 guys that are outside the city, then that's going to make it even harder for you guys, right? Because now you have members that will be negatively impacted if we have a residency requirement. But 7 is a pretty good chunk of our department. So I have no control of who necessarily applies, right? I mean, and I have very little control of who I can hire. So the fact of the matter is if I happen to get, well, let's back this truck up. We have 1 test, but what happens when we have a test and they know that we're 4896 and all 7 candidates are outside our area? It's too late at that point to make that policy.
So I guess going back to that, we've been talking residency, but I don't know that we've really kind of gotten on any even close to the same page as to what we're talking about when we say that. Do you have like an idea in mind, or are you thinking that, you got to be within 5 miles of your nearest station, or, is it 75 miles of the city? Like what kind of a range would be reasonable? I mean, something like 75 miles would still allow people to get here in a reasonable amount of time, but it wouldn't keep people from living in Idaho Falls or
Sure.
Blackfoot or, out in South County where.
I just broached the residency requirement. I didn't say what residency. I didn't mean residency meant you had to live in the city of Pocatello.
And that's just what I kind of want to
Right.
see where you're sitting.
I think an hour response time is probably, at 80 miles an hour, that would give you 80 miles.
Because, I guess, depending on what that range is, that impacts, I guess the effect on our current members.
Sure.
And if we were to try and go down a road like that.
Well, and let me be clear, I would not implement a residency requirement for people that are incumbent or that are already here. It would only be for new hires. That would just be to stave the migration to further and further. And it wouldn't be a residency within the city of Pocatello. It would be in my opinion, and probably we should have done this a long time ago, Eric, is something within reason, because again, our system is really tiered to, we need people to be able to come in.
And what are you trying to solve with that requirement? You're trying to solve the potential of,
The ability for people to come in and respond on incidents that are large incidents in a reasonably timely manner to assist with that large incident. So that
The all-call.
when I have that all call, that I have the ability to have enough people come in that I can still put you guys down while they're working the fire or vice versa, and that they're not, sorry, I'm in Coeur d'Alene, I'm not coming in. I mean, I get it, people are going to be on vacation, I can't control the vacation part of it. But and part of the concern is exactly right now. I look at right now today, under our current model, we're having trouble getting people to come in. I don't think 4896 is going to make that better. I could be totally wrong. It could be that now you're so well rested that you're all willing to take overtime, but I don't think so. I don't think that's the truth. So I think that the odds is that our struggles to get people to come in are going to get worse to some degree.
Well, and that's why we want to get some data, right?
Right.
We don't know until we got some info. So do you think that there's value to, like you said earlier, with the 4896, you've got a larger net of potential employees. Is there value to picking up people from Salt Lake or Treasure Valley or Twin Falls who may not like working for AMR or whoever, but they'd be willing to work for Pocatello? So would you be expanding your pool of medics or whoever by this schedule? Would that be a benefit that would maybe offset the perceived problems that we're looking at?
Eric, I think having the pool better like that has positives, absolutely, but it doesn't solve the immediate need of when we do need firefighters to go fight the fire.
But if on this next test we get 6 or 8 medics that are on the top of the list, that's good too, though. And that solves problems that on the other end of the department, the day-to-day business.
Good. I think there'd be easier ways to get 6 or 8 medics than the 4896. And I guess then I would ask you the question, so now I have 6 medics that live in Boise. How many of those medics are going to take transfers to Salt Lake?
All on their days at shift.
Touche.
But I see
As
your
long
point.
as it's not after hours, or
but
as long as it's not at night.
But the day-to-day, you're getting a guy for 120 days out of the year. And maybe he can't, and I'm just spitballing here, but maybe he can't fill that all-call as well, but he's going to be here 120 days out of the year. That's got to be valuable on some level, right?
But I get you for 120 days no matter what.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
I get you right now for 120, no matter what schedule you are.
But you're not getting the guys from Salt Lake for 120 days a year. You're not getting the guys from AMR or the guys from Twin Falls, right?
No? All right, we beat our 2 hours. So, next meeting, do any of those dates look attractive to you guys?
I definitely can't do the 26th. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm the only one that has any say in this.
This is the quietest you've been.
I'm letting these guys run their thing.
29th would be best for me, but I'm on shift that day, so that puts everybody.
I'm open any day, any of those days is fine with me.
Yeah, me too.
You gotta pick one. So those are what I'm available, so it's up to you guys to pick one of those.
Which would work for you?
26 wouldn't, Scott and I are both on shift on the 29th, so if you guys are okay being here, I think that would work
The
best.
29th? That's fine with it? That's fine with me? That work for you, Eric?
Yeah.
So let's keep looking at this fatigue option.
Okay.
If there is such a metric, a device, a whatever.
Okay. And
So everybody has.
you'll figure out what is what's your minimum standard? What's your standard that you want it to look like?
Oh, the fatigue.
The fatigue.
Well,
Do we, I guess what I'm asking is, do I need to bring you evidence to convince you of one way or the other, or do you have something already in mind?
I was asking you no, you said you had a couple of things that, so
Well, okay.
I was asking you said the concussion protocol. I don't know if the concussion protocol would translate into a fatigue. You said you had that, so why don't we, next time you're up, go talk to Dr. Sandy and broach that concept to him and say, does this effectively measure similar attributes?
this even work?
Would this work?
Sure.
And then you said there was a sleep.
Yeah, there's we'll have to obviously look into it a little closer, but there's a sleepiness scale, I think it's the Epworth scale. There's some of these studies have used to determine fatigue levels, and I don't know if it's an acute fatigue scale or like a chronic fatigue scale, so we have to look into that. But
If we don't ask the question, we'll never know, so I think.
that may be something,
Right.
and I know it's something that's already developed with like specific questions to be asked.
Right.
It's more of a survey kind of thing, so it would be the kind of thing that a battalion chief could sit a crew down and say, one at a time individually, give me on a scale from 1 to 10, this. And say, okay, well, your score is this, so you are okay, but you're not.
Okay. That one doesn't sound very objective, honestly. It sounds pretty subjective to me.
Well,
I guess-
there may not be one.
Yeah, there may not be. And if there's
So-
not, then we'll probably defer to hours.
The least subjective possible?
Right. Which might come down to just hours available to sleep, you know? That's pretty verifiable. It's pretty easy to look at the calls and say, they went out on this many calls in this period of time. I'm assuming you guys would want the period of time to be bigger, because that gives you the most opportunity.
Well, I would think so. Based on our current day-to-day schedule, we generally go till 5, and then it's
Right.
time to do whatever you need to do personally, as long as you're available still. So that would be maybe like from 5 o'clock to 8 a.m. the next day, or even possibly 10 a.m. because that's the end of our PT time normally, and then the day starts for.
Well, that's what I was
business.
kind of figuring 10 a.m.
So-
would be our cutoff. That way, if you happen to get the late night call, that would give you the maximum time
Yeah.
to try and catch that extra sleep.
So yeah, maybe that 5 to 10, somewhere in that, like that would be probably a good time period.
So while you're looking at just looking at the sleepiness questions, if you want to look and see if there's anything, I didn't find anything, but I wasn't specifically looking into this, but I would be interested in knowing if there is some, because I was just deferring to what she had written, which was the 5 hours of contiguous sleep. I don't know if there's something else that's an equivalent. Is 3 2-hour blocks equivalent? Is 2 4-hour blocks equivalent? What would be an equivalent? Because I'm willing to give you guys as much opportunity to make this work, if that makes sense. If 2 4-hour blocks is the equivalent to 6 hours of contiguous, fine. I don't care, as long as we can show that, yes, you had the opportunity to get that sleep, and therefore, it was there.
Okay. And then, will you and Christie, I guess,
We're gonna work on the
FLSA
FLSA thing,
Okay.
yeah. And we'll try and figure out, I don't know how soon we can get that, but basically kind of saying, okay, it looks like we would want to start the longer FLSA period on this date and have everybody transitioned over by this date. And then it would be rock and roll.
Each platoon would just be starting that
Right,
on their own date so that we'd end up on the same scale.
Yes.
essentially. Okay.
that would be the plan.
Okay.
Anything else?
Are those kind of our big things then right now? If we can figure out this fatigue metric.
So the one we haven't talked about yet, and I want to talk a little bit, I'm less worried about the communications, but the shift expectations, you kind of talked about right now, we have kind of this schedule of the 8 to 5 type of thing with workout in the morning. I think, I have concerns of what do we do with training? What do we do when we do have prior engagements? How do we cope with that? I think that, there's probably going to have to be a softening of the edges, but then that softening of the edges also implies your ability to get that 90-minute makeup nap or whatever the heck we're going to call that thing somewhere in the day. And I don't know how to solve that, but I think we need to talk about what a shift looks like, what the expectations are, type of thing.
Okay.
Okay?
Easy.
Yeah.
What time on the 29th, like 9 to 11? What's the,
Would you guys prefer morning? I prefer morning. Sure.
I prefer, sure. That sounds,
See what time it's available.
Oh, no, this was actually, I didn't bring
you
that.
put after 9
10 to noon.
And did she say, let me double check, but we'll shoot for 9 AM on the 29th and we'll let you know. We'll set a time. I just gotta make sure the council.
So then we can kind of feel out too, the trade idea with having, that you or the AC approve 72-hour trades, as opposed to BCs, and then we can also kind of feel out a residency.
Okay.
Maybe like a 75, 100 mile, I don't know, something that's not too restrictive, but keeps people within a couple hour response time.
I'd like an hour.
Okay. So I think those are definitely things that we'll have to kind of talk
Sure.
about and feel out. But
Okay.
Thanks, Chief.
Thank you.